So at this point, I'd like to invite Wendy Trass, the reference and instruction librarian here at the UBC Education Library, and Erin Fields, the open education and scholarly communications librarian at UBC Library, to share their presentation, Pressbooks for Open Educational Resources and Open Pedagogy. Wendy and Erin, please take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I'm hoping you can see my slides.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today. I think we'll open with a few introductions here, definitions, and then move on to exploring Pressbooks. So as you mentioned, I am education librarian here. I work out of the education library in the Scarf building, and I'm so pleased today to be working with Erin Fields, who is the Open Education and Scholarly Communications librarian, our resident expert on all things open and Pressbooks. So we'll start with some definitions. What do we mean when we're talking about open educational resources? This information comes from BC Campus. So BC Campus defines OERs as teaching, learning, and research resources that allow others to use, distribute, keep, or make changes to resources through permissions granted by the copyright holder. These OERs usually have an open copyright license, such as a Creative Commons license, or they're part of the public domain, which allows them to be retained, revised, remixed, reused, or redistributed. These are what are known as the 5 Rs of OERs. They could take the form of things like online courses, like MOOCs, videos, audio, slides, syllabi and course outlines, lesson and unit plans, quizzes and assignments. Got a little asterisk there beside the lesson and unit plans. Earlier this week, as part of the Tech Expo, I was in the foyer talking about very similar stuff, open educational resources and Pressbooks. And teacher education students largely didn't really know what those were. And so I was able to show them some open lesson plans and some lesson plans repositories, and they were all very, very excited to learn about those. So I'm thinking there's future programming in that area for our teacher education students. In fact, one student said, I was told this table is cool and I should check it out, which is like amazing praise. So students can definitely benefit from these in terms of using them as a starting point for creating learning design. And there's also some cost saving benefit for them as well. As a librarian, I'm frequently asked to purchase textbooks to support a course from instructors, right? And sometimes I have to come back and say, unfortunately, I can't purchase this for your course. It's just simply too expensive. And unfortunately, at that point, the cost gets turned back onto the students, which is unfortunate. Open educational resources are free to access, so students can save money that way. And then open pedagogy. What do we mean by open pedagogy? Well, open pedagogy makes use of open educational resources and in terms of teaching and learning. So again, this is from BC Campus. When you use open pedagogy in your classroom, you're inviting students to be part of the teaching process. So these are not throwaway assignments that just sit in an instructor's inbox and nobody else sees them. They can be examples of students working on something that contributes to open scholarship, to open educational resources. So this can look like something like students creating activities or exercises as part of an open textbook. It could be students creating actual content as part of class work for an open textbook. I personally have been involved in Wikipedia editing as part of course work that someone assigned to me, so contributing to public knowledge and the growth of knowledge. Another idea would be to share lesson plans in an open educational repository, such as the BCTF Classroom Resources Repository. So really exciting opportunity for students to create valuable information that is part of public knowledge. Okay, and then I'm going to pass it over to Erin to give us a bit of a dive into Pressbooks.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so just to say what Pressbooks is a open publishing tool that's run off of WordPress. If you've used WordPress before, it's just kind of this plugin that lays on top that allows you to create an open textbook or an open text because it can be a monograph, it can be fictional writing, it can be just about anything. To create that book, that then allows people to access it, use it in a variety of ways. You can license it how you choose, and you can have a variety of ways in which it's downloaded and made available. Now, I should mention that if you are associated to UBC, a student, staff, or faculty member, you do have access to Pressbooks for free through UBC campus. So you have the ability to make these texts without there being a cost for hosting or any other cost there. But I'm just going to share or show some examples of what you can do in Pressbooks. Now, this isn't going to be comprehensive. I'm just going to show you about 6 things you can do because that's the time that we have, and hopefully it piques your interest to investigate a bit more. So first off, I want to show this textbook. This is a text that was written by Dr. Wingfield Ramus on pediatric dermatology. And you can see it just looks like a web page, but then you get to a table of contents that has chapters, different parts, front matter and back matter. But what's interesting about this is not just that there is a web version to this text, but you have the ability to make multiple downloadable versions. So if your text, you want to make a digital copy, or if you want your students to be able to access a PDF or so they can use it in a print format, that is available for people to use in addition to using like an e-reader or XML download, which would allow people to adapt the work that you've created and make something new. So you can make those downloads and it turns basically your web version automatically generates into a nice PDF textual version that contains all of the material that's on the web version. Sorry about these pictures. I know they're a bit daunting. But just to give you an example of what can be done is that web version suddenly turns into that print version as well. And then you can bring it to a publisher or to like Staples or something like that and print it for $20, which is so much better than a $300 text. Another option I want to show you about what Pressbooks can do, this is the writing place, another text written by a UBC faculty member. And what you can do here is you can create a lot of embedding. So you can add like beautiful images, but you also have the ability to embed any sort of media files. So it can be video, audio files can be embedded into the chapters to make it more interactive than say a flat print book could be made into. But you also have the ability to use what's called H5P. Now, H5P is, and you might have heard of this already because I know the Faculty of Education does host an H5P server, but H5P allows you to create a bunch of like quiz kind of functionality, interactive functionality for self-assessment, self-reflection. So here we have an example of the native land digital map that was created inside of H5P that allows people to select where they might live in the world to know what land they actually live on. So you can see this beautiful interactive that's been made inside of this book, and it gives you information about the different local nations within that geographic community. So this is just one example, but there's several other examples of interactives that can be developed that are quite beautiful. Next, I want to show you the foundations of chemical and biological engineering. The only reason I want to show this is I want to show you that Pressbooks can handle a bunch of different output formats. So for example, here you'll notice a lot of mathematical equation, and this has been created so that it is accessible for people who have maybe vision impairment or have to use assistive technologies. Usually in the past, these sort of equations would just be an image, and the image is not readable by assistive technologies. MathJax, which is inside of Pressbooks, allows you to create these sort of interactive pieces that are accessible. So this will read out as a mathematical equation. It also has the ability to do music, and it has the ability to do multiple languages. So you can have language outputs that are, say, Persian, for example. And then I want to show you some other options here, but my screen was doing something funny. Here is Let's Read French Books. And we're looking at, again, another text created by a faculty member at UBC, where they've taken a French book and they've added these glossary functionality. So if I click on the glossary of penchant, it tells me what that word means in English. So you can use the glossary to help people understand terminology that can be confusing and embed it directly into the text as a pop-out. But what's also interesting is if we click on that, it will bring me back to the back of the book where the glossary is automatically generated. And what they've done is they've created audio so the students will understand how to pronounce the word. So they've embedded sound audio into the glossary functionality. Now, the last thing, because I know we're at the end here, is I wanted to show you Mythokoinoi, which adds the functionality of hypothesis. Now, hypothesis is a tool that allows you to create interactives with students. So if you want students to be able to annotate the text, have discussions about certain parts of the content of the text, you can do that directly in Pressbooks. So you see here on the side, students were having conversations about the chapter on Hesiod's theogony. So that creates kind of that interactive component, but also allows students to mark up the book for their own research and for their own study later, so they can annotate, highlight, do all those things that you want to do with a print text, but in a digital format. So I'm going to stop there. That was a lot of functionality I went through and only like a scraping of what is possible, but I hope that piques your interest in Pressbooks.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Wendy and Erin. That was very informative. So now we'll invite anyone and everyone to ask questions or add to the conversation. If you prefer to use the chat, please feel free to do so. We'll be keeping an eye on it. But yeah, you could just unmute or use the raise your hand function and ask your questions for Wendy and Erin.
I'm happy to jump in if that's okay. Thank you both so much. I know Pressbooks is, I really appreciated that you brought up, like opportunities for students. Have you worked a lot with students on sort of developing opportunities for publication? And say, for example, if, like as a learning designer, if I'm thinking about like ways to incorporate those opportunities into, a course, what work recommendations would you have? Because I think this is a really cool way to sort of engage students in that, publication opportunity.
Yeah, I work on a lot of projects actually where we're engaging students in the open pedagogy path. Right now, I'm working on one that's on trans memoir, where students are writing about kind of the lived experience of transgender individuals in Canada. Just a rather interesting topic, and they're basically writing it as edited book chapters, and it's going to be published as a open ebook. And the faculty member is going to continue to roll that out every term that they write, that they have this course, so it becomes like this anthology, which is really rather interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of support for this kind of work. We've built in structures on how to go from we want to do this in a course to, okay, here are all the steps, paths that need to be done in order for you to come out with a conclusion of a text that's ready to be reused over and over as courses come out. So we work in the library in my unit to support those things, not only just setting up the text and this structure, but also teaching students about copyright and understanding open access and using that content to publish. We also teach them how to use Pressbooks, so they're learning like the skill set of like HTML and playing with the actual technology in addition to the subject matter expertise. So they're doing both at the same time. So we scaffold that in to the course. And then at the end, we kind of have like a little jam session where we all gather in a room and everybody starts loading their content, and we're there to assist with those processes as well. So we do have a workflow ready and available if people are interested in doing this work. And they just have to kind of contact my office, or of course, contact Wendy or myself directly to kind of get those things started. And I'm just putting my email in the chat. So if folks are like, how do I do that? That is how.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks
I
so
actually
much.
have a question as well about hypothesis, because I feel like it's such an incredible tool, but kind of seldom used, at least from what I've seen in the Faculty of Education. And so I'm wondering if you could just expand on those possibilities, like in terms of, if you can make smaller groups who can comment on hypothesis and like the different ways that you've kind of seen it being used.
Yeah, primarily what I've seen it being used as is two ways. One is for the editorial workflows. It's easy, like if you're writing, somebody comes in and comments on the chapter to get it fixed and cleaned up. Obviously, that's one option. But using it inside of the course, what traditionally has happened is that instead of using, the inside of Canvas, for example, where you have discussion strings, they take it out of that space and they move it directly to the text so that the discussion is happening at the very point where the content is being taught. Which adds a whole bunch more value because every annotation, if you click on it, it leads you right to the text where that conversation is going on. Typically, what we do with Pressbooks and Hypothesis is we do group students because it can become overwhelming. So we either group it as this group of students are doing chapter 1, the next group of students does the next discussion chapter and moving forward onto that. Or we group them in like actual groups of like you 5 are evaluating this text and then do a presentation in the class of that discussion that happened inside of chapter 1. That's more to manage the system because it can get cumbersome and you do have to sort of package all that conversation if you're going to start a new course, like course content next term, it's another course. You've got to kind of like archive that and take it out. So it's better to kind of minimize that. But I think of it as getting out of the discussion string and attaching that discussion string directly to the resource where the discussion should be happening. So that's kind of how it's being used.
That's helpful. Thanks, Erin. Do we have any more questions for Wendy and Erin? I think just one more question maybe for me again.
I can jump in and sorry.
Sure.
Apologies. I was distracted in the beginning. I know my name was called, so my apologies. But this is such an interesting area, and I think it's so underexplored, especially in our faculty, or at least the work that we are doing with the instructors. I think there's a lot of potential to do a bit more around this. So I'm just wondering if you can, if you have an idea of how much work is happening related to the Faculty of Education, if you can highlight some of the things within our faculty, if you are aware of.
Yeah, I do. I do know that you have Sunita Janjiani that is doing work in ed for sure. But in terms of other outputs that are coming from the open education community, I've not seen a great deal, at least with the Pressbooks side of things.
Yep.
Certainly activities are happening that are open kind of activities that are not directly related to Pressbooks. But some things that I do see that are options, and I used to be a teacher before I became an academic librarian, is I know having that book of, I got to teach history class, having a book that's all the lesson plans that I could use for the history curriculum is extremely beneficial. So I could see that students are creating that content in the courses already. What we could do is transition that into an open pedagogy assignment where at the end we have them publish those lesson plans. And now there's a phenomenal book of lesson plans that they can use inside of the courses and the next group of students can use and add to. So I see a lot of benefit there to kind of take out the costs from teachers. Because I remember how much money I spent on resources as a teacher because they don't give you that funding and that money necessary for you to do that work. It's not like in academia where I do have a PD fund. You don't have that funding as a teacher and you get paid significantly less than you would as an academic. So I would say anything that we can do that both supports the students creating and sharing content ongoing, but also gives them that resource to take away afterwards. There's huge potential, I think, in education to do this kind of work.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting, very informative. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Learned a lot.
Okay, well, that brings us to our time. So thanks again, Wendy and Erin. We know firsthand that the work that you do is incredibly supportive and valuable to us, but also to the faculty more broadly. And so we really appreciate you being here to share with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Mm-hmm.